Right, hi everyone. So this is the fourth market structure that we're going to look at today, and this is an oligopoly. So this is a pretty important one. The market structure diagram is a little bit tricky. This one, a little bit tricky, but luckily there's only one of them, so there's no kind of short run. There's only a long run equilibrium in oligopoly. So the first thing, again, very quick revision on what an oligopoly is. It's when it gets to a situation where there's big dominant players in any industry. I mean, as firms get bigger, they either become monopolies or they become so big that they dominate a market by dominating it with competitors, or they just dominate it by themselves. Like any big company that you can think of is an oligopoly or it's a monopoly. It's one or the other. If they're smaller companies, it's in perfect competition. So let's just look really quickly at the characteristics of an oligopoly, and again, we'll kind of talk it through. So the definition: it's a market form in which the industry is dominated by a small number of sellers. Characteristics: there's few sellers in the industry. Now, oligopoly, you can look all around and look at oligopoly. You can look at the supermarkets here in Ireland, the Tesco's, the Aldi's, the Lidl's, the Super Values, the Dunnes stores. You can look at tech companies. You can look at the Facebook, Google, Apple, Microsoft. You can look at property companies here in Galway. There's 3 or 4 auctioneers. You can look at car companies. There's, again, 5 or 6 main car companies. So oligopoly is everywhere. And again, it's really one of the most dominant market structures out there. And we'll look at the kind of characteristics. What does that mean for us as consumers? There is interdependence between firms. They kind of do their own thing. Okay, so there's not full knowledge between what every firm is doing, as opposed to like in perfect competition, where there's complete knowledge of the market. There's not really. We don't really know what each firm is doing. So there's a little bit of secrecy between them, and they do sell different products. So like a Google phone and an Apple phone, same thing, but there is differentiation that exists. Dunnes stores versus Tesco, they're different. Sell similar products, but they can be different. There's high barriers to entry, huge barriers to entry in a lot of these cases, because it's just very difficult to compete with these juggernauts in a particular industry. Now, obviously, different industries have different types of barriers. Tech has kind of lower barriers to entry because anyone can create an app. But again, it's what happens to smaller companies is they generally get swallowed up by one of the bigger companies. Collusion may occur, and this has been a feature of oligopoly since time immemorial. Really, we've talked about this in class, that there can be a little collusion, because what they want to do is they want to protect the status quo, and the status quo works for these firms. They don't want to compete that much with other firms. They're all making supernormal profits, and they all just want to keep these supernormal profits going. As a result, they don't really compete with each other on price. So they don't try and go cheaper or more expensive or whatever the case may be. They do non-price competition, so it's advertising, it's brands, etc. So price is a really important thing when we're doing this. So there's one thing that really you need to know when we're drawing the diagram here, and this thing called a kinked demand curve, and I'll explain this when I draw a diagram here of it. So you've kind of seen this before. We've spoken about it in class. Again, this is just a revision thing here. You shouldn't be looking at this for the first time if you haven't done oligopoly. And really what we're looking for here is we're looking at this thing called price rigidity. When you are in an oligopoly, I can't even say it again, situation, there are certain things you can do with the price, and there's certain things you can't do with the price. And I'll explain that in a second. Okay. So there's essentially 2 demand curves. There's a different strategy if you want to raise your prices, and there's a different strategy if you want to lower your prices instead. And because there's 2 strategies in play, we essentially have 2 different demand curves, and these 2 different demand curves kind of intersect kind of at this point here in the middle, and that's where we kind of set our price and our quantity. So let's have a look at what this actually means in reality. So let's just do our demand curve here. So you go away there for a second. I need the ruler. So really what we're talking about here is when we draw a demand curve for an oligopoly. I'm just going to look at the demand curves here and the kind of kink demand curve here for oligopoly, rather than doing the whole thing. Is what we have is 2 situations. We have 2 situations right here. We've kind of one demand curve that kind of goes up like this, and we've kind of one demand curve that kind of goes like that. If that makes sense. And you can call this D1 if you want, and you can call this D2. But essentially what is happening here is this. In an oligopoly situation, so for instance, if you're Dunnes stores, and this hypothetically was the price that you set. So for instance, again, what we have here is we have a price. So we have a price here, P1, and we have a price here, Q1. Now, will Dunnes stores increase their prices? Will they increase their prices? No, they won't increase their prices. Because if Dunnes Stores increase their prices, what are their competitors going to do? Their competitors are going to do nothing. Dunnes Stores increase their prices. What are you going to do? You're going to run to Tesco. If Dunnes Stores increase their prices, you're going to run to Tesco, which means that Dunnes Stores, Dunnes Stores demand is going to fall. So Dunnes Stores increases their prices. Tesco does nothing. SuperValu does nothing. All the consumers run to the competitors. So Dunnes Stores are not going to increase their prices. What if Dunnes Stores instead lowered their prices? Well, if Dunnes Stores lowered their prices, so again, let's just take a second demand curve. So let's just say this right here was the demand curve. So again, what's happening here? If Dunnes Stores lowered their prices, and they went from, for instance, again, P1 to P2 or to Q2. So again, we're just doing this, or P1, Q1. Let's just take a different demand curve. If Dunnes Stores lowered their prices, what would happen to their demand? Well, nothing really. Again, this is just kind of like one of these thought experiments we have to do. If Dunnes Stores lowered their prices, would they get loads of business? Would consumers run to them? Would customers run to them? They wouldn't really, because what would Tesco do? What would SuperValu do? What would Aldi do? They'd all follow suit. So if they all followed suit, there would be no reason for Dunnes Stores to lower their prices. So raising prices, consumers go elsewhere. Lower your prices, all the competitors follow. There's no value in doing it. So what we call this curve, of course, is we call this an elastic demand curve. And we call this one, we call this an inelastic demand curve. Like so. So again, just to summarize, if Dunnes Stores raise their prices, it's an elastic demand curve. People are just going to flee them. They're just going to run to Tesco. But if they lower their prices, everyone else has to follow. Quantity demand is not going to change at all. So they're going to stay as they are. So there's no incentive for them to raise their prices. There's no incentive for them to lower their prices. And as a result, the equilibrium point kind of stays around here. Okay. So how do we actually put this into a proper kind of long run equilibrium point? So again, this is our long run for oligopoly. So let's have a look at this. So what do we do? First things first, like everything else, we need to draw our demand curve. So demand curve is going to be two demand curves. And this is what makes this different from any other of these market structures. There's two demand curves here for an oligopoly. So we do one here. And then what happens, of course, is we go from elastic to inelastic. And when we go to inelastic, we have to draw this about here. So this right here is going to be our demand curve. It's also our average revenue curve. It's also our price curve. With any demand curve, we also need to draw our marginal revenue curve. Now this is tricky to draw. This is where this gets a bit of practice. So really, and again, maybe we should put this in. Ooh, let's go back. This is kind of here is this is essentially your equilibrium point. So if this is our equilibrium point, let's just mark it straight away with that kind of line like that. Okay. And let's throw in our marginal revenue curve. So every demand curve has a marginal revenue curve. So we're just going to draw our average revenue, our marginal revenue curve for the first demand curve. To draw that, we come straight on here. We're going to stop there. So there's our marginal revenue curve for the first demand curve. The second demand curve, however, is a little bit steeper. So we have to draw this again a bit steeper. Now, where we draw this is we actually leave a gap. And this is kind of the secret to this whole thing. We leave a gap between now, well, let me draw it first. So what we're going to do is we're going to draw a curve like right there. Perfect. That's our marginal revenue curve. So again, this marginal revenue curve is for this. This marginal revenue curve is for this. We have to put the two of them in though. We have to put the two of them in because we've two demand curves in this. So how do we finish this off? This color. So number one is we need to, this is right here is kind of our golden zone. This right here is our zone where supernormal profit is made. Anything above this line is price rises. We don't do price rises. Anything below this line is price falls. We don't do price falls. So in an oligopoly, you don't increase your price or you don't decrease your price. There's no incentive to increase. There's no incentive to decrease, which means, again, this is the kind of golden area here where supernormal profit can be made. And if that's the golden area there where supernormal profit has to be made, this is where our other two cost curves have to come in through. So let's draw them right now. And this is very simple to do. We have a marginal marginal revenue curve. Oh, I made a mistake there. Oh no, I didn't. Our marginal cost curves and our average cost curves. So our marginal curve is going to look like that, and that's our marginal cost. And then our average cost is also going to go through this point. Marginal cost always cuts our marginal cost always cuts our average cost at the lowest point. So again, we just draw this and we come straight up. Perfect. And that right there is our average cost curve. So a couple of things we need to do. Let's throw them in. We know that this is our equilibrium point right here. This is always our equilibrium point. So let's throw it in just a bit more clear this time. Dunk, 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 dunk. And this right here is going to be our Q1. So we're going to produce a Q1. And we're actually going to sell. What price do we sell at? We sell where we can sell. We sell where we make money. And we make money by price multiplied by quantity is your revenue. So this point right here is going to be our P1. That's our price that we're going to sell. And then we just have to add a few more things in here. So for instance, let's just add in at this point here is your E point. You could add in this point here if you want, which is like A. You could add in this point here, which is like B. And again, as long as you refer to it over here in the specs, you're fine. So what's happening here? Right at this point here, is it lower? Is this point lower? Is our average cost here lower than our average revenue? Average revenue here, average cost here. What's the point here? Supernormal profit is being made. So again, if you want, you can take out your ruler and you can say your average cost is here. There's your point of equilibrium. So all of that, for instance, all of that is your SNP, supernormal profit. There is no reason again why you're gonna. So you're always gonna keep your zone in around here. Always gonna keep your average cost around here. Average costs can increase slightly or they can decrease slightly. There is always going to be movement in costs, but if they stay within this area here, you're still making supernormal profit. Prices can't go up and the prices can't go down because there's no incentive for anyone in oligopoly to put up their prices or to decrease their prices. Again, you increase their prices, people are going to flock to your competitors. You decrease your prices, competitors are going to do the exact same thing, and there's no incentive to do that. So that's it. That's our long run equilibrium point of an oligopoly. Last thing we have to do is we have to finish out the specs thing. So we have to analyze what we've just done there. So S, what does S stand for? Supernormal profit is being made. And we need to just say this, okay? Why is it being made? Because your average revenue is greater than your average costs. You can see it here. Here's your average revenue right here. Here's your average costs here. Supernormal profit is being made. P, what does P stand for? Price. So a product sold at P1, which we've marked over there, we have, and quantity sold, or price, sorry, product sold at P1, and Q, quantity produced at Q1. Perfect. E, what does E stand for? E stands for equilibrium. Equilibrium is at what point? Is at E, where, what we always do, we always produce where M more is equal to MC. Always produce where M more is equal to MC, and that's exactly what we're doing there at the equilibrium. Costs, cost of production. Where is that? Is at point E as well? Is at E. And also what you'll actually notice with an oligopoly is you are actually producing at the lowest point of the AC curve. So at lowest point of AC. So in this situation, oligopolies are actually quite efficient, which is last thing, which is S, which is scarce resources. So scarce resources are being used efficiently because you're producing at the lowest part of your AC curve, which again is down there. And that's why oligopolies, you know, if you have really strong competition, you will have to run efficiently. So oligopolies are, again, dominant market structure, very popular for big industries, obviously, make a lot of money. There's no incentive to increase or decrease prices. They just want to retain the status quo. And as we've talked about in class, market share is sometimes the most important issue for them. Okay, I think that's it. Any questions, put it in comments, and Sinead.